events. Those donations are most welcome and they go towards funding many of our projects. Now, this is, of course, our centenary year. So please don't forget our centenary project, Give Every Child a Future. The project aims to vaccinate 100,000 children across 9 Pacific Island countries against 3 diseases. Now, we're running this in conjunction with UNICEF. $45 will vaccinate a child for life. 450 10 children. So please go to our website, see the link there, and please donate. Today's guest speaker is Professor Ramesh Thakur. He is the former Assistant to the Secretary General of United Nations, Senior Research Fellow at the Toda Priest Institute, and also at the Crawford School of Public Policy. David Hirsch will be introducing Professor Ramesh later in our proceedings. During today's proceedings, we will also be showing 3 videos created as part of the UNAA video project, and David will provide background to this project and the videos a little later on. Now, we also have the pleasure of presenting the Rotary Club of Sydney Community Peace Award 2020 today, and Charlie Allen will be doing the honours with Craig Foster, who will be receiving the award on behalf of Play for Life's campaign. Now, any questions and comments that you have may be submitted via the chat function throughout the talks. Please note that all comments are viewable by meeting hosts. And please be aware that microphones, other than those of the speakers, will be muted during the meeting. I will now hand over to our club president, Kathy Tate, who will now officially open. Vice President, I beg your pardon, who will now open. Kathy, you should now be able to get off mute.
Hello, I'm Kathy Tate, one of the vice presidents of the Rotary Club of Sydney. I'm here representing our president, Fatima Ali, who sends her sincere apologies for not being here today. I am proudly on Gadigal land. I recognize and respect the traditional custodians and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, on which I work and live. Let us acknowledge their continuing contribution to land, water, and culture. I would like to pay my respects to these traditional owners of country throughout Australia, including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, as well as elders past, present, and emerging. So, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this momentous occasion, the celebration of the 75th year of the International Day of Peace, whose theme is Shaping Peace Together. We call this a blockbuster meeting day with world eminent speakers, piece of the Peace Perspective videos of Australia's most important promoters of peace. To support our club's peace objectives, we'll also be awarding our Community Peace Prize today to a very worthy and local organization. Our club has a long-standing practice of learning, educating, and promoting peace through our peace building group, which is led with skill and passion by our chair, David Hirsch. Today was also made possible by our close relationship with United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales, by providing us with an important platform and community for promoting peace. At this time, I would like to sincerely thank all of the contributors, the planners, the producers, and the team of people who brought this day together. We are honored to count you as part of our Rotarian community. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the passing of one of the world's most notable peace and equal rights warriors and hero, RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. You forever changed the fabric of all of our lives forever. Rest in peace, RBG. Without further ado, we invite you to get inspired. Think about what your own pledge would be for shaping peace together. Thank you for attending. Thank you for our international participants on this day. We're very grateful that you tuned in. Put your seatbelts on, and I'll turn it over to our Peace Building Group Chair, David Hirsch.
Thank you, Kathy. And thank you all for joining us from wherever you may be in the world as we celebrate United Nations International Day of Peace. It's the 22nd of September here in Sydney, Australia, but it's still the 21st of September, which is the official Peace Day at UN headquarters in New York. Peace Day was created to get the world to focus on the ideals of peace, to imagine a world where we can live as one, as John Lennon once said, with respect for international law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's now 75 years from the founding of the United Nations, and we still have a ways to go to achieve those ideals. The geopolitical landscape has changed, and our expectations need to change with it. It is not 1945 anymore. But the UN is still here, and Rotary is still here, and we need to ask, what can the United Nations do today to achieve the ideals that emerged from the wreckage of the Second World War? And what can Rotary do today to help? Rotary's relationship with the United Nations dates back to 1945. It was instrumental in the creation of the UN at the UN Charter Conference in San Francisco. And today, Rotary holds the highest consultative status possible within the UN as a non-governmental organization. Today's Rotary has 7 areas of focus that range from disease prevention to education to supporting the environment. But its first and overarching area of focus is peace and conflict prevention and resolution. Rotary has trained over 1,000 peace scholars who now work in public and private sectors and in non-governmental organizations around the world. It has partnered with Sydney-based Institute for Economics and Peace to train Rotarians, and everybody else for that matter, in the principles of positive peace, those being the attitudes, institutions, and structures that make for peaceful societies. The problems we face in 2020 are global. They are not state-based as they were in 1945. Climate change and COVID are examples of that. We need a realistic global outlook, and cooperation is key. The theme of this year's International Day of Peace is Shaping Peace Together. It's about listening and learning, fostering dialogue, and collecting ideas. And we have more time on our hands to do this than we usually do, so no excuses. We have a lot to listen to and to learn from today. As you've already heard, Professor Ramesh Thakur, former Assistant Secretary General of the UN, will be speaking. You'll be watching 3 videos presenting perspectives on peace, and we'll be awarding our annual Community Peace Award. I hope that you will be engaged and enlightened and energized about peace and your role in making it happen. It's now my pleasure to introduce Sahara Sumar, Director of Programs at the United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales branch.
Thank you very much, David. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and I'm really excited to see you all. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay, wonderful. So yes, I'm here to represent UNAA New South Wales. Our role at UNAA is to promote the aims, the goals, and the ideals of the United Nations in Australia, and particularly in New South Wales. And our mission is to inform, inspire, and engage the public in our various activities of the UN. And in particular, we have a focus on a 4-pillar strategy, which is peace building, human rights, sustainability, and global citizenship, as we continue to build and engage our volunteer and our membership into these 4 pillars. We also offer educational programs and scholarship opportunities. But as David mentioned, 2020 is the 75th anniversary of United Nations, and it has launched UN 75, a global initiative inviting dialogue on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We know there's still a way to go, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity to gather public opinion and your solutions to these global challenges. So I invite you to participate in the world's largest opinion poll by typing UN75 in your browser and completing the questions and share with us your thoughts. We really need to hear from everyone. So in planning for International Day of Peace, a few months ago, we came together with our fabulous Rotary partners, and we started reflecting on what peace means to each of us and what aspects should we highlight. Our discussions confirmed that there are many factors impacting peace. It's a complicated topic, such as Australian peacekeeping missions abroad, strengthening multiculturalism, addressing domestic violence, promoting Indigenous rights at home, and that it takes all of us contributing in all our important ways to achieve peace. So we were keen to share this diversity of perspective through the experience of those closest to it. And we invited people of prominence, influence, and advocacy to come together to talk about their thoughts on peace. We were thrilled to have the contributions of speakers such as Julian Burnside, AO, who talks about the rights of refugees and asylum seekers, Dean Parkin, who speaks on the importance of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and Major General Cheryl Pierce, who explains Australia's peacekeeping role abroad. And we had 25 other exceptional contributors in our video compilations. So I would like to acknowledge the team that helped us put these videos together. We have 3 videos compiled with 25 speakers, and the team that helped bring it together was, of course, David Hirsch, Svetlana Fetuk from Sydney Peacebuilding Group, Alexandra Stafferton and Team Ford from our own UNAA team, and our most brilliant, I have to say, media partner, Hardeep Girin, who's played a key and instrumental role in helping us to bring it all together. He's from Know My Group as part of the World Made Good platform, and none of this would have been possible without his expertise. We're really excited to share these 3 videos with you and the messages that come with it. And the first one will be really looking at the voices from other peace organizations. I urge you to think about how we can be shaping peace together as we view and listen to these videos. So thank you very much.
Greetings, fellow global citizens. My name is Dr. Patricia Jenkins, President of the United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Peace Perspective video, which is part of our special celebrations of the United Nations International Day of Peace. Peace is also central to achieving the UN 2030 Agenda and associated 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals were agreed to by leaders of all nations to address the global challenges we face.
One of the most powerful foundations in promoting peace here in Australia and across the world is in the respect of human rights, in recognizing and honoring the dignity and rights of each person as an equal human being. While Australia is by no means perfect, it is, however, committed to the values of inclusion, equality, fairness, equal justice, and freedom for all.
The rule of law is central to international peace and security, political stability, development, economic and social progress, as well as safeguarding fundamental freedoms and human rights.
We can all have different views, we can all come from different places in the world, and we can all look different as well. But in the end, we're born free and equal in dignity and rights, and we are all the same as human beings.
For me, that's a world that builds security without nuclear weapons. They are indiscriminate, abhorrent, and now, thanks to the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty, illegal.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart represents an opportunity really given to nations, an opportunity to reimagine and remake ourselves and our identity. We must seize this opportunity by giving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples a voice to Parliament protected in the Constitution. We must strike agreements or treaties amongst First Nations.
As we stare down a global pandemic. But I hope we can use this time to reflect on how we can emerge from a crisis to become a stronger, more compassionate and more peaceful nation. Let's truly be the land of the fair go, because when we strive for equity and justice, we're reaching for peace.
Without equity, there can be no peace. And without peace, we won't, as a society and as a world, be able to muster the collective energy we need to address the really deep challenges, like climate change and providing health for all, that the world currently faces. Peace starts and ends with the commitment to the great call of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to leave no one behind.
Climate action is critical to the pursuit of peace. Australia listened to the scientists when it came to COVID-19, and we must listen to them now when it comes to the climate emergency we're facing. We need to learn from the pandemic experience, transferring lessons of collaboration and support into our response to climate change, adapting our economies and our lives.
The absence of war provides us with unique opportunity to build nations that are prosperous and based on peace.
Thank you very much for that, Sahira, and Hardeep, for your help in running the video. We'll see the other two a little later. Just before I hand over to David Hirsch, who will introduce our guest speaker, Professor Ramesh, just a few quick tips. If you'd like to watch both the speaker and the slides at the same time, then what I suggest you do is just go to View Options at the top of your screen. Hopefully you can see the screen I'm sharing here with you. Click on View Options. I'm just waiting for this slide to refresh here. You will then see side-by-side mode. Click on that, and you should be in a speaker's view. So click on speaker if you don't already have a speaker's view. And then you will see a bar down the center of your screen. Just hover your cursor over the center of that bar, right click, and you can move left to right, and the slides and the speaker pictures will change size. So change that to your preference and away you go. Et voila. I'll put those details up on chat as well for you to be able to see. So happy viewing, and I'll hand over to David now. David.
Thank you, Glenn. Now, people have opinions on just about everything these days. Social media and the internet are full of them, and most of these opinions are unencumbered by knowledge. The United Nations is the subject of a lot of opinion. Unlike most commentators, our guest speaker, Professor Ramesh Thakur, knows what he's talking about. As former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, his thoughts on the UN are worth listening to because they come from a base of real knowledge and experience. Ramesh is currently Emeritus Professor in the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University in Canberra. He is a Senior Research Fellow at the Toda Peace Institute, among other titles and institutions. As Rotarians, we aim to be pragmatic problem solvers, and we also operate with a strong sense of ethical principles. Ramesh's talk is especially relevant to us. It is entitled Balancing Idealism and Realism in Today's United Nations. What is a principled pragmatist to do? Would you please welcome Ramesh Thakur?
Thanks, David. And my apologies for not being able to take part in that video compilation. I was out of station at the time and couldn't quite get there. My talk will focus very much on this as a central theme. If we can go to the first slide, please. Next one. I want to begin with an incident from when I was in the UN I was giving a lecture to an MA class at the University of Madras in Chennai in India. And at the end of it, the first question threw me because this young man said, and they call you sir to professors there, how do you explain your optimism, sir? And it threw me because I thought it's the youth who should be optimistic, not us old fogies. And it stayed with me, obviously. But it occurred to me that you have to be optimistic. It's almost part of a job description to be a UN official. You have to believe that human beings do improve, that society can improve, that the world can be made better, and that it can be made better through collaborating, through organized systems. And if you don't believe in that, you shouldn't be working for the UN, and you're not going to be a UN supporter. Thinking about it further and using some of that, I think it's useful to break the UN into two parts. It's simultaneously an organization with its structures, with its people, with the Secretary General at the top, with all the funds and agencies. But it's also an idea and a symbol. And we in the West, too many of us forget the importance of the idealism and the symbolism. It is the only entity in the whole world that houses the divided fragments of humanity. And paradoxically, the more the divisions around the world, the greater the need for something like the United Nations to counter that and to retain faith in a better future for all of us, not for particular individuals or groups or countries. And I was reminded of this tension between realism and idealism by an incident by someone who I think is one of our two greatest Secretaries General we've had, Dag Hammarskjöld, the other being Kofi Annan. In one of the innumerable crises he dealt with, Hammarskjöld was speaking in the Security Council. And as he came out, the British ambassador, Sir Pearson Dixon, accosted him in the corridor and requested him, urged him to give a more tempered point of view from the Secretary General, which reflected what the British wanted at the time. And of course, the UK is a permanent member. And Hammarskjöld demurred. And Sir Pearson said, well, Secretary General, please do remember there is such a thing as political reality. And Hammarskjöld's reply to that was, yes, and there is also such a thing as integrity. And remember that because that is an answer that is today inconceivable from the Secretary General. Regardless who the Secretary General is, it's not a particular Secretary General. And I also want to mention Kofi because he chose me personally for writing his reform report in 2002. And at one meeting with him, I asked him why he chose me. He said, well, I was looking for someone who understands the UN, who understands world affairs, who understands the role of the UN in world affairs, and is committed to making the world a more peaceful place and a better place by working through the UN systems and improving the UN where necessary. So then we started talking about how he wanted me to approach the reform report. And he said, look, because of your skills and your background and what I've just said, I'd like you to draw up a list of those issues that are important for us to address. What are the issues that are important? What are those that we should address? Then identify those that, in your judgment, will be done because most countries support it and all the key countries support it. Take them off your list. Identify other issues that, in your judgment, no matter how much we try, will be in the too hard a basket for the moment, will not be done. Take those out. Leave me with a list of 3 issues which are on the margin as to whether we can get them through or not, which are important, we'd like to get them through. And on those 3 issues, I will invest the prestige of my office and we'll try to get it through. Even if we fail on all 3, that's the 3 that we'd like to put in. And I thought that was a very interesting way to frame the tension between idealism and realism. and so do that. And of course, as some of you will know, I've worked a lot in my life in different capacities with Gareth Evans, who also, I think, by the way, is the best Foreign Minister we've had in Australia. And he wrote this very good book, which you haven't read, you should read, Incorrigible Optimist, a political memoir. And he begins by quoting, I forget who, to the effect that better to be an optimist and be occasionally proved wrong than to be a pessimist and always proved right. So that's something that is a guiding principle. Next slide, please. I forget who in the introduction mentioned the remarkable transformations since 1945. Just to recap, at the time, Britain and France were victorious Allied powers, but of course were in complete ruins economically. We still had the Soviet Union, ruled by Stalin, which had suffered massive human loss of life. China was racked by civil war between the communists and the nationalists. The US stood alone as a giant major power. Germany and Japan were defeated enemy powers. India was still a colony. South Africa was an apartheid state, although not yet an international pariah. And today, in contrast to all that, Germany, Japan, India, and South Africa are amongst the major claimants to permanent membership of the Security Council. Next slide. But the issues have also changed, and quite dramatically. Military power compared to 1945 cannot so easily be converted into the currencies of power and influence. Threat perceptions have broadened from hard to human security issues, and we've already discussed climate change and pandemics. Democracy seems to be undergoing deconsolidation with dwindling trust and faith in democratic institutions and governance, even in Western societies, including Australia, and you can map those in public opinion polls. There's been an eastward drift of wealth, power, but also political legitimacy. Not too many people in the West are aware of the extent to which Chinese citizens actually have trust in the competence of their own government in delivering good governance, leaving aside issues of human rights. The emerging world order is no longer unipolar, bipolar, or even multipolar. I think it's polycentric. There's different centers of power, influence, wealth. And in this world, we have a pluralization of diplomacy rather than bloc-led world. So on some issues, India will collaborate and cooperate with China and Russia. On other issues, it finds itself in opposition with China. And we have this in a number of other issues. But most remarkably, compared to 1945, no country any longer has the leverage to set rules for the world on its own. Next slide. And so a fundamental question. With such big structural transformations, there's zero reason for expectations of continued effectiveness of the malinated multilateral machinery, which does reflect the particular distribution of power, the security threats, and the structural and contextual factors of the world as they obtained in 1945. Now, this must be probably the first and only time I've actually quoted myself in a context, so let me go to the next slide. Because this is from a former colleague of mine, also a former Assistant Secretary General, a German, Franz Wohlmann, and this is only from a couple of weeks ago in an exchange he had. And I like the way he framed it. Challenges that we face are complex, integrated, global, and we had one of our speakers in the video compilation point out, why can't we transpose the lessons we learned from handling COVID to climate change, for example, as an integration. By contrast, the responses are simplistic, think Trump, reckless, think Trump, parochial, think any world leader you get to think of around the world at the moment. So the leaders, typically, not of course always, and we have an excellent leader across the ditch in New Zealand, which is one of my countries of nationality, but most leaders are intolerant, authoritarian, nationalistic. Next slide. In that context, what does the United Nations mean and what does it do? Well, it is the hub of the mandated global multilateral order. Most people have no idea of the extent to which the United Nations is the bar none incubator of global laws, rules, and norms for governing the world on a more stable, predictable, peaceful basis for all of us. But within the UN system, the General Assembly is the normative cockpit. So the strain of idealism is centered in the General Assembly. And it is the Assembly that sets standards for the world. But the geopolitical cockpit is the Security Council. That's where the realism part comes in. And that's why it's the Security Council that has the responsibility for enforcing these standards that are articulated by the General Assembly. But you get this paradox within the Security Council itself, in the veto clause. In terms of the relationship between the veto power and the collective security, for a successful collective security, the decision-making competence of the Security Council has to be unlimited. It must have the power and authority to make any decisions in order to preserve the peace as necessary. But in order to get the major powers to stay as members of the United Nations, they were granted veto powers, which are equally decision blocking in their scope and ambit. And therefore the veto clause often frustrates the overall desire of the Security Council to act. However, in logic, the veto reflects the realities of power. The major powers have the greatest capacity both to enforce the peace, to keep the peace, and also to break the peace. And it reflects reality in that if you take action authorized by the United Nations against a major power, you will launch the very calamity that is a fundamental priority of the organization to avoid, namely a major world war. So you've got that clash, and we can come back to that in different contexts, I will. But it also means in a world in which the United States has unrivaled military power, you get a division between the legitimate legal authority of the United Nations and the power of the United States. But this is not true only of the United States. And in recent times, we've seen China reject the arbitration of a permanent court in its maritime dispute with the Philippines. We've seen Russia refuse to cooperate in the investigation of the MS-17 tragedy. And most recently, we've seen the United States actually threaten to arrest judges and other personnel, the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. And the UK also in recent times, in fact continuing, rejects the International Court of Justice decision with respect to the Chagos Islands in the Indian Ocean. So this is a pathology that afflicts all major powers. France, of course, we remember particularly with regard to nuclear testing. So how do we make the transition in the geopolitical cockpit from the unipolar to the polycentric world order? Next slide. You see that tension also in the ban treaty that Jem referred to from ICANN in her video compilation. The NPT was negotiated, drafted primarily by the Soviet Union, as it then was, United States, supported by the P5, who are the 5 nuclear weapon states. It reflects the geopolitical realities of 1968 when it was negotiated and 1970 when it came into force. The ban treaty, rather than in opposition to the NPT, is better viewed as NPT plus. It takes for granted the successful elements of the NPT and seeks to complete the disarmament obligation in the NPT under Article 6, which has not been implemented by the nuclear weapon states. And of course, it has Australian roots in terms of ICANN's origins in Melbourne in particular. Now we come back to this normative versus geopolitical issue. The NPT is supported by, and the ban treaty is rejected by all the 5 nuclear weapon states, who are the P5, and therefore it's not getting anywhere in the Security Council. But because the General Assembly is the normative center of gravity, it's in the General Assembly that the ban treaty was adopted. And this is, I think, the first and only instance, certainly that I can recall, where on an issue of high-profile security, the General Assembly has adopted a treaty against the united opposition of all the P5 countries in the Security Council. So you get this clash between the normative power and the geopolitical power. And we shouldn't forget the power of principles, and I put in the responsibility to protect in that, because there are many non-fulfillment of its obligations and disillusionment from that. And yet countries are not able to walk away from that, because to do so would be to take up a position that is fundamentally anti-humanitarian and that no one wants to do at the level of rhetoric, at the level of principle. Next slide. You have the same tension showing up with regard to what's happening at the moment. We have the World Health Organization, and I don't think we can deny the failings that were shown up in terms of its slowness and tardiness in recognizing the gravity and scale of this crisis when it first emerged. I think it was unduly deferential to Chinese sensitivity in rejecting or in affirming globally that there is no evidence of human-to-human transmission. It reflects the politicization of the organization in refusing to have any dealings with Taiwan, and yet Taiwan has been one of the most successful response countries in handling this particular crisis. I think the call for inquiry ignores the fact that that is standard operating procedure for the WHO whenever we've had crises in the past, but you do that after the crisis is over. And it is, I think, criminally irresponsible to start withdrawing funds and complicating the issue in the middle of a pandemic by introducing political divisions. But most importantly, I think the crisis reinforces the indispensability of the WHO, or something very much like it. We need a global organization, a specialized agency, to monitor, to engage in surveillance, to detect, to coordinate responses, to provide technical assistance to developing countries. And this organization has to be part of the UN system, because there is still no substitute for the United Nations in terms of legitimacy flowing from universal membership, in terms of its convening power, in terms of the field presence, which gives it a global footprint unlike any other organization, in terms of its technical skills, and in terms of its political neutrality. There is no substitute for that. So that's why we need to work within that. And I think the pandemic highlights, as I said, both the shortcomings and flaws, the need to reform those, but also the crucial role and the indispensability of the WHO and the United Nations, in a sense, as an international organization. Next slide. I think the biggest disappointment in terms of the powers given and the actual results go back to the Security Council. I think few independent observers would dispute the claim any longer that the Security Council, decade by decade, has become progressively less and less fit for purpose, with the exception of the immediate period after the end of the Cold War, when there was a blossoming of activity and activism, and a lot of good things were done. And therefore, there is an urgent and imperative need to reform the Security Council. If you go back to the initial slide, the first substantive slide, the extent to which the world has changed, including in geopolitical equations, and the increasing misalignment of the Security Council membership and powers with the real world, it's hardly surprising that it's getting less and less fit for purpose. And if it's not going to change, the question that does arise is, if it has in fact proven reform-proof, as many of its critics have alleged, then the only alternative is to recreate a new United Nations by convening perhaps the equivalent of the San Francisco Conference. Think of it this way. Asia, Africa, Latin America, the global South, they make up today 85% of the world population. They make up 20% of the permanent membership of the Security Council? How can the Security Council possibly understand what the world is in these countries with regard to its major mandates, the real constraints and opportunities faced by decision makers in these countries on human rights, on environmental challenges, on peace and security issues? It just cannot do so. And its lack of effectiveness reflects these important constraints. Next slide, please. So how do we then remain optimistic, avoid cynicism? And this question came up in a public lecture I did at the University of Melbourne as well. Again, it was primarily, though not exclusively, students. And a young, by name and appearance, a Chinese-Australian woman asked me, how do you manage to avoid cynicism if you work within the UN system or if you work on the United Nations? And how do you ensure that your decisions are guided by a moral core? And again, I thought about it and I said, well, given my stage in life, an important question that I put before myself is, I'm faced with a choice. If someday my decision was to be made public and my choice was made public, would my children feel embarrassed or proud that their dad made this decision and this choice? And it's not a bad way in which to ground your inner morality in dealing with decisions. It's something that if it becomes public, you need to feel proud about owning up to it. And you need to feel that your kids won't be embarrassed and in fact will be proud rather than embarrassed. And with those, I think we think of things like the Iraq War. I'm glad the United Nations never endorsed that act of aggression. And Kofi personally paid a very heavy price with the Americans for having said it was illegal. I won't go through the things, the all for food, it's too complicated to do it very quickly. The last part I want to mention is that the UN University, that's the Appointments and Promotions Committee, which I chaired for the university worldwide with 14 institutes for the 9 years I was with the university. And something that when I left, I was able to say, not that it had been a conscious policy, but all the appointments I made, not one person had I known before I joined the UN system. And as I said, I was chairing that. So it's not true that the entirety of the UN system is afflicted with nepotism and cronyism. Parts of it do try to do their best within the constraints. And of course, I would get things that I shouldn't have got in terms of lobbying from member countries. But there are ways of handling it without destroying your relationships. So it is possible to reconcile the two, provided you don't imbalance with too much preference, deference, and priority to either realism or idealism. Is there any slides left, or are we done now? Is that the last one? Oh no, okay, I want to finish with that. To go back to the symbolism as opposed to the structure and organization. I think it's worth remembering that at the end of the day, the United Nations stands for three things. It exists so that peoples in the world condemned to die in fear learn to live in hope instead. And that's what the responsibility to protect recommends. Those condemned to die of want through poverty instead learn to live a life with dignity, with basic human needs satisfied. That's what the SDGs represent. And those who are afflicted with apprehensions from a variety of causes, instead are able to turn their life around and live a life built around aspirations, not apprehensions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ramesh, for that. We have a couple of questions. I think we have time to fit in. The first from Kathy Tate. In today's current climate, is there still a place for peacekeeper troops around the world? Are they still an effective protocol for helping to maintain peace in areas of conflict?
No. I don't know if Tim Ford is one of our participants, but he's a better person to answer this. But the short answer is yes, absolutely. there remains a place. I think they are maintained because, again, they are indispensable. They are not substitutes for a war-fighting coalition when we believe that is necessary. So if you were to require another operation to evict, for example, Saddam Hussein, the equivalent of that, you still need a UN-authorized multi-lateral action force because that has the combat capability. But in situations where we want to have a working ceasefire following a peace agreement brokered by the United Nations or anyone else, where the combatants have agreed to separate, the insertion of a UN peacekeeping force brings in a physical separation and a visible reminder of the care and interest of the international community. It gives the diplomats time to get going with conflict resolution. It allows humanitarian agencies, both intergovernmental and non-governmental, to get into the field and provide humanitarian delivery. And it gives opportunity for the special representative or the Secretary General as head of the peace operation to work with the various stakeholders, including the permanent members of the Security Council, including all the local actors, to try and find ways to resolve the conflict. All that would be much more difficult without these peacekeeping forces. And let me finish with the example of UNIFIL, the UN interim force in Lebanon. The reason we put the word interim into its title was to indicate that we were getting tired in the UN of permanent peacekeeping presence. That if they didn't get on with solving the dispute, we would in fact not renew it. But every time the question of renewal came up, and any time that it was a genuine possibility of the Security Council wouldn't renew, the people in the field began to plead and to beg. You, the United Nations, are our fathers, are our mothers. If we withdraw, we'll be much more vulnerable. We'll revert to the previous situation of great hardship and threats to our lives and security. In many cases, UNIFIL was doing functions of local government. So I think it buys time, and sometimes long time, for the actors involved, both local conflict parties and the international actors, to get on with the job. And if they refuse to do so, or they fail to do so, it's totally unfair to put the blame for the collapse of the ceasefire or the long-lived peace on the United Nations. They are an aid, they're not a panacea, they're not a substitute for diplomatic resolution, but without them, it will be much more difficult to engage in the effort to resolve the conflicts.
Okay, I think we have time for a quick question and answer. This one's from David Hirsch. How can Rotary assist in achieving the changes that the UN needs?
Well, we've always said the United Nations is not us, it's all of us. It's not you and us, it's all of us together. It's a people's organization. It has become more and more open to NGOs, as was pointed out. Rotary is an NGO in good standing. I think it's a two-way communication between the United Nations needs and expectations, but also limitations and constraints, and the needs and expectations of the people, and what it is that certain groups of countries can do, so we can work through our governmental processes as well, in supporting the objectives, in making sure it's adequately resourced and capacitated, but also communicating what the UN does to the people and to the government, defending it against critics of the government, while accepting that some changes do need to be made, and working with governments and with UN representatives to that end.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just before I hand over to David then, please stay with us, Professor Ramesh. We're going to see the next couple of videos and a presentation of the award before a vote of thanks. So thank you again, and I'll hand over to David.
Thanks, Glenn, and thank you so much, Ramesh, for that remarkable discussion. It's nice to know that there are reasons for being optimistic about the United Nations, but also we have to be realistic about the need for change. So thank you so much for a very, very enlightening presentation. So now moving along, the second of the UNAA Peace Perspectives videos will be shown. This one addresses the institutions that are involved in peace building in Australia and around the world.
Greetings, fellow global citizens. My name is Dr. Patricia Jenkins, President of the United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Peace Perspective video, which is part of our special celebrations of the United Nations International Day of Peace. Celebrating this day is great significance, as peace is at the very heart of the work of the United Nations. So as we commemorate this most important day, we must take time to reflect on our past, present, and future. We must remember those who have sacrificed their lives in the name of peace, and those who continue to provide, protect, and preserve peace around the world.
In my opinion, the best way to support peace is for 193 member states of the United Nations to implement and action the agreements and the resolutions that they've endorsed, including those that come from peace operations, peacekeeping, and peace building.
And if you don't communicate well with your team and with the local Malian people, you have very little room for success. Communication with people means understanding their culture and what is acceptable for their backgrounds. And to do this, you need really great advice.
The world first showed its concern for refugees at the end of the Second World War. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights includes Article 14, which says that every human being has the right to seek asylum. Unless we start to treat refugees properly as a world, then the chances for peace are very slim.
In Afghanistan, I'm confronted every day by the very real consequences of conflict. Peace in Afghanistan would mean that the millions of people in humanitarian need would be able to go about their daily lives without fear. It would mean that families could go to the market to buy food for their meals without having to navigate through armed checkpoints. It would mean children could walk to school without having to worry about IEDs beside the road. We have an obligation to become advocates for peace and to become advocates for vulnerable people who are living in war-torn countries around the world.
The International Day of Peace provides an opportunity to reflect on our shared humanity and renew our commitment to peace. Australia has been at the forefront of international peace and security since the United Nations was established.
Peace is not just the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. Police can make a significant contribution to these efforts, but to be truly effective, there must be a peace to keep, local buy-in, and the international support for long-term investment.
Peace is important for Australia today and for our future, as we want future generations of Australians to grow up in a world free from fear and tension, where opportunity is abundant and marginalisation is non-existent. Peace is not a given. We all are responsible and need to own our own commitment to building and promoting peace.
Probably most important is to build resilience. This includes the community or population affected by a fracture of peace, and also resilience in those who seek to effect a peaceful resolution, be it to a domestic or international peace dilemma. Thank you.
Sorry about that, just coming off mute there. At this point, David, I think it's introduction to the Community Peace Award. Over to you.
Thanks, Glenn. Now, every year, the Rotary Club of Sydney Peacebuilding Group recognizes an individual or an organization that has worked to build a more peaceful community. Past recipients have promoted intercultural sensitivity through a schools-based program, assisted refugees and asylum seekers to find work, helped socially disadvantaged people, especially those recently released from prison, to reintegrate into wider society. This year is different. COVID has made us realize that regardless of our different backgrounds and circumstances, we are all in this one together. In the COVID world, we need to help each other. We need to be responsible for each other for the greater good. Australians have two characteristics worth recognizing. First, there is a strong culture of volunteering, and Rotary is a good example of that. Second, there is an almost pathological preoccupation with sport. This year's recipient of the Community Peace Award has capitalized on these two national characteristics, volunteering and sport. And to tell you more about this, can I introduce Charlie Allen. Charlie is an active member of the Peace Building Group. He's the Partnerships Director for the Institute for Economics and Peace and a Vice President of the Rotary Club of Sydney. Over to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, David. It certainly is an honour to be able to present the award, the Community Peace Award from the Rotary Club of Sydney to the Play for Lives campaign. And it's also a pleasure to introduce Craig Foster to deliver, to receive the award. I've had the pleasure of hearing Craig Foster speak on a number of occasions recently. He recently spoke to the Rotary Club of Sydney, and he's well known for his prowess on the sports field, but also as a sports commentator and a social activist and advocate. I want to throw some of Craig's words back at him, and I heard him recently say that we need to challenge the exceptionalism of elite sports, or elite sports people. Being an elite athlete, or just being an athlete for that matter, certainly doesn't cancel that social contract. We all have to be engaged citizens contributing to a community. In fact, given the potential social leadership that elite sports people can provide, then you could argue that social contract is greater. So Craig Foster certainly lives that ideal, and he leads the Play for Lives campaign. He displays and acts out that social leadership or community leadership, if you like. But not only does he act and play it out himself, but through the Play for Lives campaign, he's encouraged many sports people to fulfil and extend that social contract. So it gives me great pleasure to present this, the 2020 Community Peace Award. Before I present the award, I'll just read the citation. So the Rotary Club of Sydney Community Peace Award 2020 is awarded to the Play for Lives campaign. The Rotary Club of Sydney's Peace Award recognises an organisation or an individual whose work at grassroots level has demonstrated a commitment to the ideals of peace and community building. This includes reaching out to those in need, especially when facing particular hardship. The Play for Lives campaign was created in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Under the Play for Lives banner, athletes unable to train or play their sports due to the pandemic connected with charities and support groups to help their communities. Because most of the Australian volunteers are in that older or vulnerable group category, they're not being able to assist as they used to. Thousands of volunteer positions have been left vacant because of COVID. Thanks to the Play for Lives campaign, these are being filled by our sportsmen and our sportwomen. Our athletes are now giving back to their communities that have supported them through their careers. They've been delivering medications, transporting patients, preparing and packaging food hampers, doing deliveries for Meals on Wheels. They visited the elderly, the isolated, provided online support and encouragement to young people as well. In times of great disruption with severe social and economic dislocation, healthy communities rally together to help each other out. Unexpected connections are made, friendships forged, and peace is built. Rotary recognises the Play for Life campaign for its role in building and sustaining the peaceful communities and putting service above self. With great delight, I award the Play for Lives campaign the Rotary Club of Sydney Community Peace Award. Thank you, Craig, and I'd like you to accept the award and offer a response.
Thank you, Charlie, and to the Rotary Club. Look, I'm delighted to receive this on behalf of all of the people who've been behind the Play for Lives campaign and of course, all of those who volunteered both in Australia and in fact now internationally. And the campaign extended out to New Zealand and even India, I'm delighted to say, who have created the Play for India campaign and have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars through the platforms that elite athletes have in India. To support vulnerable communities, particularly in relation to weekly and daily financial needs, just donations of money, and food and other medications throughout COVID-19. So that's been wonderful to see. And that's the power of sport, is that we can extrapolate these types of things out among our global sporting community. And in this week, when the International Day of Peace is something that we come together to discuss. I'm not sure if celebrate is the right word. It remains something of an elusive dream. Sport has a responsibility to participate in that. Now, the beauty of Play for Lives during COVID was it was an opportunity for sport to meet parts of the community that otherwise would not have. Sport exists in very much its own social bubble, really, and likes to talk about how it does so much so much good for the world, and certainly in many respects that's true. But there is a line over which sport doesn't like to cross, and I believe that it's being forced to become comfortable in doing so now through professional athletes around the world. In particular, the Black Lives Matter campaign, gender equality is another really important issue, where athletes and women and the Matildas, with the strong support of the Socceroos, are now forcing Australian football to genuine gender equality through both governance, administration, and also pay, of course, most importantly, and bridging that pay gap. For sport to meet refugee, vulnerable asylum seeker communities, to meet different parts of Australian society, Aboriginal, Indigenous communities in Redfern and elsewhere, just in the Sydney context alone, is so very important in the context of peace building, because it's about building new social connections, so that when we face those challenges that we do from time to time, we have resilient social connections, resilient communities, a resilient society, with enough of us who are capable and have a platform through sport to speak up and say no. When politicians, for example, want to speak about the South Sudanese community in Melbourne or in Victoria in a way that's improper and that we think is unacceptable, we've got people to say no. I know them. We have a personal connection. I've helped them. I've been there. I might have packed food hampers during COVID-19. I might have, made donations. I might have supported those kids through online volunteering aspects and mental health support. Doesn't matter what it is. It's about people-to-people connections, and sport does that almost better than anything else. So it's been wonderful to see sports really important and prominent response throughout COVID. I hope that this is a start of even stronger connections between sporting clubs and their local, state, national and international communities, and towards sport playing an even greater role in building the peace that we all look forward to.
Thanks for that, Craig, and thanks, Charlie, for that. I think you can all understand why this award was so well-deserved for the Play for Lives campaign. Thank you so much, Craig.
Pleasure.
Glenn, I think we're ready to now watch the last of the UNAA videos, which deals with aspects of community involvement. Thanks.
Greetings, fellow global citizens. My name is Dr. Patricia Jenkins, President of the United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Peace Perspective video, which is part of our special celebrations of the United Nations International Day of Peace. I do hope you enjoyed the videos which share various thoughts and narratives on peace in Australia and beyond. And together we can help create a safer and more peaceful world for all in the wonderful spirit of humanitarian mateship.
We've become very self-centered in our national and personal lives, and this is a trend that needs to be reversed. We can achieve that by connecting with people outside of our usual social circle. And one good way of doing that is volunteering. Australia has a strong volunteering ethic, but it's something that needs to be promoted, especially among young people.
We have a responsibility to our spouses, to our children, family, and those around us. Peace in our homes and peace with ourselves has a ripple effect on those around us. There is no price tag that you can put on peace. You cannot buy peace. You have to make a decision to want peace in your family, to want peace in your community, and peace in the world.
One of the best ways to find peace in ourselves and peace in our own hearts is to help others, and through empathy, through compassion and understanding, helping others achieve peace in their life, in their world, in their environment.
One way to promote peace is by connecting people from different backgrounds and beliefs. I grew up in New York as a Jewish boy where I went to an all-Jewish school. I didn't know anyone who was Arabic or Black, Christian or Muslim. The only person I knew who had different beliefs to mine used to make fun of my religion. But when I moved to Australia, I met and made friends with Christian and Muslim people, Aboriginal, African, Arabic Australians. This helped me be at peace with them and them with me.
We have choices. We can choose to leave the old ways behind and make way for a kinder, more equitable and connected world. Let's make peace alliances for cooperation and exchange. Let's make the world change in solidarity for peace.
When I think about the future of peace in Australia and indeed globally, there's two things that immediately spring to mind. One of them is technology and the other is the evolution of humanity. And what I mean by those from a technology perspective is the advance of artificial intelligence and the awareness that there will be a huge social and economic impact to the societies in which we live. On the flip side of that conversation, the evolution of humanity, I refer to social and emotional intelligence and the awareness that we have today of the emotions that the humans have, which drive our behaviors and drive our decisions.
Peace to us is cultivated by acknowledging, including, and consulting on the different intersectionalities that affect our daily lives. The core of this discussion on how we can maintain peace stems from acknowledging that addressing climate change and the impact it will have on maintaining the peacefulness in future are key points that we would like to discuss as young people, both at home and abroad.
In many ways, positive peace describes an optimal environment for human potential to flourish. How much do we actually understand about peace? The sad reality is not much. We mainly study war. Unless we have a world which is basically peaceful, we'll never get the levels of trust, cooperation, and inclusive necessary to solve these problems. Therefore, peace is a prerequisite for survival of society as we know it in the 21st century.
I believe that one of the most important initiatives that can be taken by Australia and indeed by all the countries of the world is to outlaw the use of nuclear weapons as a weapon of war.
Thank you so much, Hardeep, for that and your help in broadcasting as well as producing those videos. So I'll hand over now to Charles Allen, who will give vote of thanks and acknowledgements. Charles.
Thank you, Glenn. And firstly, I would certainly like to thank Sahira for the conversation and her insight or providing some insight into the United Nations Association for New South Wales, talking to the 4-pillar strategy and promoting dialogues around the Sustainable Development Goals. And certainly I've enjoyed viewing the collage of videos that have been put together. Thank you. To our keynote speaker, Professor Ramesh Thakkar, thank you for your presentation today. Thank you for joining us on our International Day for Peace event. I guess there's three things I'd like to thank you for, and certainly that multilateral influence that you've had on policy and strategy, really as a practice pioneer, and also your influence across peace education, I guess, as a thought leader. But I think the thing I want to thank you most for today is being an optimist and being happy to be proved wrong occasionally. So thank you for that. And finally, thank you to Craig for accepting the award today and providing us further insight into a connection between community leadership and sports. Thank you, and I'll hand on to David for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Charlie. And there's so many people that need to be recognized in this. I think it's been a very successful afternoon. In addition to the people you've mentioned, of course, thanks again to Kathy Tate, our other VP, for your thoughts, and to Hardeep Giran, without whose remarkable technical knowledge, this would never have come off as smoothly as it did. Thank you so much, Hardeep. And lastly, of course, to Gwen for hosting this so ably and dealing with all the technical niceties that are certainly beyond me. I hope that the more than 50 people who are watching this were engaged and enlightened and energized about peace and their role in making it happen, and hope that you taken something from this about the importance of supporting the United Nations, which, as Ramesh described, was created to bring together the divided fragments of humanity. The United Nations deserves our support, and Rotary has always been behind it, and hopefully Rotary will continue to be a positive influence on the UN as it changes, as it must change into the future. So with that, and with thanks to all of you for participating in this, I will bring the meeting to a close formally. And those of you who wish to stay on for fellowship chat are welcome to do so. But otherwise, thanks again for being with us, and enjoy the rest of your day from wherever you may be in the world.
The informal part of the meeting.